One world hides a secret that could reshape empires. A young apprentice scribe named Kalen takes a forbidden scroll from the Grand Archive, an act that breaks every rule. He is guided not by greed, but by a vision, a recurring dream of a magnificent dragon in its final moments. This single choice puts him in the path of the city's determined authorities. It also awakens something long quiet within him, a deep connection to the ancient Dragonlords, whose legacy was thought to be lost. The scroll contains more than words. It holds a hidden guide, a way toward a truth that could change everything. By the end of our journey, you will see the beginning of a new legend and the return of an old power. What force would you risk everything to call forth? I am curious to know where in the world you are listening from and what the local time is for you right now. The chill night air tore at Kalen's tunic as he scrambled up a rain-slicked roof tile. Behind him, the shouts of the city guard echoed, their heavy boots pounding on the cobblestones below. The cryptic symbols from the scroll burned in his mind, a frantic map only he could see. They guided him left, then right, across a dizzying series of ledges and overhangs. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure fear. Every instinct screamed at him to freeze, to curl into a ball, and hope they passed him by. But the scroll's guidance was a steady pulse beneath the panic, a thread of ancient certainty in a world gone mad. He reached the edge of a warehouse roof, and his stomach dropped. A wide chasm, a gap between buildings that seemed to stretch into a bottomless blackness, opened before him. The guards were closing in from behind, their torches casting long, dancing shadows. There was no other path. Trusting the map meant trusting a leap into darkness. He took 2 running steps and threw himself into the void. For a terrifying moment, there was only the wind and the distant lights of the city far below. Then his feet hit solid slate on the other side, the impact jarring his teeth. He had done it. The scroll was real, but his victory was bitter. Looking back, he saw the faces of the guards he had known his whole life, now twisted with anger and betrayal. He was no longer Kalen the scribe. He was a fugitive, an outlaw. His old life was severed as cleanly as if he had cut the rope bridge behind him. The scroll's path now led away from the city, into the dark, waiting line of the wilds. He could have tried to hide in the familiar alleys, to beg for mercy from someone he knew, but that would have meant surrendering the truth he now carried. So he made a choice that felt less like a decision and more like a destiny accepting him. He turned his back on the only home he had ever known and ran toward the unknown. His flight revealed a far more dangerous truth. These were not just city guards pursuing a petty thief. Their coordination was too precise, their determination too fierce. They moved with a purpose that spoke of a deeper, more shadowy command. He was being hunted by an order that wanted the scroll for themselves, an organization that understood its power far better than he did. As the last lights of the city faded behind the dense trees, a new sensation bloomed within him. It started as a faint warmth in the center of his chest, a quiet ember where only cold fear had been. With every step deeper into the ancient forest, the warmth grew, spreading through his limbs like a gentle, rising tide. It was a comfort and a warning, a sign that his desperate flight was over, and a much larger awakening had just begun. Exhaustion turned Kalen's legs to lead, each step a monumental effort through the tangled undergrowth. The forest, once a place of quiet mystery, now felt like a living cage. A sharp cry, followed by guttural snarls, shattered the silence ahead. He pushed through a final wall of ferns and stumbled into a small clearing. A woman, her wagon tipped on its side, was desperately fending off two hulking, beast-like creatures with a broken spear shaft. Their forms seemed to shift in the dappled light, all matted fur and jagged claw. They moved with a terrifying, unnatural coordination, cornering her against the wreckage. Without thought, Kalen lunged forward, a desperate shout dying in his throat. As one of the creatures turned its glowing eyes toward him, a searing heat erupted from his palms. A torrent of raw, uncontrolled flame shot out, striking the beast and sending it reeling back with an unearthly shriek. The fire vanished as quickly as it came, leaving only the smell of scorched earth and the tingling, terrifying memory of power in his hands. The woman, Lyra, stared at him, her chest heaving. Her initial wariness was a palpable force, her eyes narrowed not in gratitude, but in sharp assessment. She looked from his still smoking hands to his face, and a slow, knowing recognition dawned. "You have the mark," she stated, her voice low and rough. "Not many left who can call the fire like that." She was a rogue trader, she explained, her cargo now scattered and ruined. She had heard whispers of hunters in the deep woods, creatures drawn to a specific kind of energy. They were not just random monsters, they were seeking out those connected to the dragons. Her offer was pragmatic, stripped of any false sentiment. "You clearly have no idea what you are doing or how to survive out here. I know these lands. I can get you where you need to go. In return, you provide the protection that only a Dragonlord can offer. And if there is any glory or reward at the end of this road, we share it." Kalen's hands trembled at his sides. The power that had surged through him felt alien and terrifying, a wild animal he had unwittingly unleashed. Could he trust this cynical stranger who bargained for her life with the cool detachment of a merchant? She saw him not as a person, but as a tool, a weapon for her own survival and profit. Yet the cold, hard truth settled in his gut. He was lost, hunted, and now he had a target on his back that attracted things from the shadows. He could not make this journey alone. His choice was not between a good option and a bad one, but between certain failure and a dangerous chance. "I accept," he said, the words feeling heavy and final. The stakes of their partnership became terrifyingly clear in that moment. The creatures had not been after Lyra's meager goods. They had been drawn to him, to the nascent power awakening inside him. The wilds were not just a landscape to be traversed. They were an active hunting ground, and he was the one being sought. With a new and uncertain ally at his side, Kalen consulted the scroll once more. Its glowing symbols pulsed steadily, no longer pointing toward a vague wilderness, but directing them toward a specific, daunting destination, the mist-shrouded peaks, where the first great dragon was said to have found its final rest. The air in the whispering woods tasted of damp moss and old magic. Every leaf seemed to murmur, and the twisting paths shifted when their backs were turned. The scroll was little help here, its symbols fading into a faint, confused shimmer. It was Lyra who noticed the first marker, a stone archway grown over with vines that hummed with a low, resonant energy. This was not a place to be crossed by force. It was a place of tests. The first challenge was a circle of cold, black stones surrounding a single, dormant hearth. The air within the circle was frigid, sapping the warmth from their very bones. The woods seemed to whisper their deepest doubts. Kaelin, hearing the scornful voices of the city guards, Lyra the echoes of past betrayals. To pass, he had to ignore the chilling lies and kindle a flame, not with tinder, but with will alone. He focused, remembering the terrifying heat in his hands during the attack. The ember in his chest glowed in response, and a single, steady flame bloomed in the center of the hearth, pushing back the cold and the whispers. The path ahead shimmered into view. Each subsequent puzzle was a lesson in the language of fire. He coaxed embers to dance in specific patterns to open a wall of thorns. He had to judge the precise heat needed to warm an ancient, frozen stream without boiling it dry, feeling the water's resistance as a tangible thing. With every success, the ember within him grew from a spark to a contained, understanding warmth. The wild, fearful power he had unleashed before was now a tool he was learning to hold. The final illusion was the most cruel. Kaelin saw Lyra, her face twisted with greed, stealing the scroll and vanishing into the trees. At the same moment, Lyra saw Kaelin, his eyes glowing with reckless power, turning on her. The woods fed on their deepest insecurities, the partnership built on shaky ground. For a long moment, they stood frozen, mistrust a colder chill than any the woods could conjure. Then Kaelin made a choice. He let the illusion of the treacherous Lyra fade and spoke into the silence, sharing the details of his recurring dream, the great dragon's final flight, the specific shape of the mountain peak where it fell. It was a risk, laying his deepest truth bare. Lyra, shaken from her own vision, listened, her pragmatic demeanor softened by a fraction. She offered no grand confession in return, but a simple, solid nod. The shared truth dispelled the last of the wood's magic, and the true path solidified before them. It was there, on that newly revealed trail, that they found the signs of others. A boot print in soft earth, too deliberate to be an animal's track. A scrap of dark gray cloth, snagged on a thorn bush, bearing the faint, charred symbol of a clenched fist. The ashen hand, they were not just a vague threat anymore. They were here in the woods, moving with a purpose that mirrored their own. The shadowy order was not just hunting Kaelin, they were racing him to the tomb. Pushing through the final curtain of weeping willows, they emerged from the wood's oppressive grip. Before them, stark against the sky, rose the jagged, impossible peaks of the Dragon's Tooth Mountains. Their goal was in sight, a daunting and majestic sight, but the relief was short-lived. A cold wind swept down from the heights, carrying with it a feeling they both recognized, the distinct and unsettling sensation of being watched. The narrow mountain pass was a treacherous stretch of wind-scoured stone. One moment, the path was empty. The next, dark figures melted from the shadows, their movements silent and synchronized. The ashen hand had been waiting. They moved not like common bandits, but like a single organism, their gray cloaks blending into the rock. There was no demand for surrender, only the cold, efficient drawing of blades. Kaelin's heart seized. This was not a capture. It was a confrontation with a clear and final purpose. Lyra reacted first, shoving him behind a rocky outcrop as a crossbow bolt sparked where his head had been. "We have to break their line," she hissed, her eyes scanning the cliff face above them. "Use your fire on that overhang, now." The command was sharp, desperate. Kalen's hands trembled, the memory of the burning creature vivid in his mind, but the ember in his chest flared in response to the immediate threat. He focused, not on wild rage, but on the specific point Lyra had indicated. A controlled jet of flame licked at the base of the precariously balanced rocks. As he worked, Lyra was a blur of motion, using a length of rope and a metal hook from her pack to create a makeshift pulley, leveraging a smaller boulder to put maximum pressure on the weakened stone shelf. It was a terrifying, improvised dance. Kalen's fire heated the rock, and Lyra's cunning provided the final push. With a groan that seemed to come from the mountain itself, the overhang gave way. A cascade of stone and dust thundered down, cutting off the main force of their attackers and sealing the pass behind them in a cloud of debris. When the dust settled, one of the Hand's scouts was separated from his comrades, trapped on their side of the new rockfall. Disarmed and cornered, the man's arrogance quickly crumbled into fear. Under Lyra's intense, unyielding gaze, he confessed their purpose. "The Ashen Hand does not seek to destroy the dragon's legacy," he spat, "but to claim it. To forge a new world order from its ashes, a world ruled by a power you cannot possibly comprehend. The leader, a man he named Vorlag, was once like you. A Dragonlord, he saw the futility of sharing such power with the unworthy. He believes it is a tool for control, not a gift to be wasted." Kalen felt a cold sickness that had nothing to do with the thin mountain air. The violence of the rock slide, the deliberate act of causing such a collapse, churned in his stomach. He had used the very power he was just beginning to understand to cause such a disturbance, to reshape the landscape itself. The weight of that action was a heavy stone within him. Lyra argued for a more permanent solution with their captive, her voice cold with the logic of survival. But Kalen looked at the terrified man, no longer a faceless enemy, but a person, and made a choice. He could not become what Vorlag represented. He would not use fear as a weapon. "We let him go," Kalen said, his voice quieter but firm. "He has nothing left to report but our mercy." The decision, born from his horror, yielded an unexpected prize. As the man scrambled away, he turned back, a flicker of something other than fear in his eyes. He looked directly at Kalen. "You face Vorlag himself at the summit," he warned. "He seeks the Heartstone. He believes it can bend the will of any living thing to his own." With that, the scout vanished into the lower crags. The mission was no longer just about discovery or unlocking a forgotten past. It had become a race against a fallen brother, a man who had twisted the Dragonlord's legacy into a nightmare of domination. Their climb became a desperate, breathless sprint against time. The air grew so thin it burned their lungs, each gasping breath a reminder of the immense height and the even greater stakes. The entrance to the ancient site was somewhere above, a silent door waiting in the stone, behind which the fate of two very different futures now hung in the balance. The summit was a silent, wind-scoured bowl of stone, and at its heart lay the entrance to the ancient place. It was not a grand archway, but a seamless wall of obsidian, black and deep as a starless night. The scroll in Kalen's hands fell inert, its final symbol pulsing once before fading completely. Their guide was silent. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, what he had to do. A sharp edge of rock served as a blade. He drew it across his palm, the sting a small, sharp punctuation to his journey. As his blood, marked with the faint, shimmering pattern that had appeared after his first use of fire, touched the cold stone, the mountain seemed to inhale. The obsidian drank the offering, and with a groan that shook the very peak, the impossibly smooth surface split apart. The stone doors ground open, revealing a cavern of breathtaking scale. And within it, resting on a dais of pure crystal, lay the colossal form of the first dragon, Emberclaw. Its frame was not white, but a deep, volcanic black, and it seemed to drink the scant light, radiating a latent, ancient warmth. Then the air in the chamber shifted, thickening with a presence both immense and gentle. A voice, not heard with ears but felt within the soul, echoed through Kaelin's mind. Child of fire, you have come home. The spirit of Emberclaw had awakened. It showed him fleeting, beautiful images, a time when humans and dragons soared together as partners, their fates woven into a single, glorious tapestry. It showed him the great parting, the slow fading of that bond, and the long, quiet sleep of the last guardians, and it revealed the truth Kaelin had both feared and hoped for. He was not merely connected to the Dragonlords. He was the last true heir, the final, unbroken line of a legacy thought lost to the ages. As this revelation settled upon him, Lyra stood transfixed, but not by the dragon's spirit. Her eyes were locked on the mounds of treasure that glittered around the base, artifacts of a lost age that held fortunes beyond counting. The cynical trader he had met in the woods re-emerged, her ambition, a stark, cold fire in the presence of such history. We could take just a few pieces, she whispered, her voice tight with want. We could be set for life. This is not ours to take, Kaelin replied, his own voice steady despite the storm inside him. This is a memory, a responsibility. The rift between them was now a chasm, her desire for security and wealth clashing directly with the weight of the destiny he was being offered. He turned from the treasure and back to the waiting spirit. The choice was clear. He could walk away, let the past rest, and try to reclaim some shred of his old life. Or he could accept the legacy, knowing it would forever separate him from the world he knew. I accept the pact, he said, the words simple and final. The spirit of Emberclaw flowed into him. It was not a violent takeover, but a merging, a joining of will and purpose. Power, vast and deep as an ocean, flooded his veins. The ember in his chest erupted into a steady, brilliant sun. In that moment, he understood the true nature of the Dragonlord's gift, not as a weapon, but as a bond, a shared strength with all living fire. The consequence was immediate. As the pact sealed, a brilliant, invisible light erupted from the tomb, a beacon of returned power that would shine in the minds of every creature and every person who still remembered the old ways. He was now a king returned to an empty throne, and every enemy of that throne would know he was here. The ground beneath their feet trembled, not from the closing of the ancient place, but from a force outside. From beyond the stone doors, a thunderous, triumphant roar echoed through the mountain pass, a sound of brutal victory. The ashen hand had found them. The stone doors of the tomb burst inward in a shower of dark fragments. Standing in the wreckage was a man clad in gray, his presence casting a chill that fought the chamber's latent warmth. This was Lord Malachar, his eyes sharp and intent, fixed not on Kaelin, but on the crystal dais, where the Heartstone now pulsed with a soft, captive light. "You have done the hard work for me, heir," he said, his voice a low rasp like grinding stone. "Now the true power returns to a worthy hand." He raised his own palm, and a whip of condensed shadow snapped toward the artifact. Kaelin reacted without thought, a shield of shimmering heat erupting from his outstretched hand. The two forces collided with a sound like tearing metal. This was not a duel of blades, but a fierce contest of wills. Malachar's attacks were precise and unyielding, tendrils of darkness that sought to overwhelm the very fire in Kaelin's veins. Kaelin's power, by contrast, was a wild river. The immense energy gifted by Emberclaw's spirit surged through him, unpredictable and immense. One moment, a defensive wall of flame would hold firm. The next, a careless burst of raw power would scorch the cavern ceiling, sending molten rock dripping down around them. He was a novice trying to conduct a symphony with a hammer, his own strength nearly becoming his undoing. Lyra was a constant, desperate motion at the edges of the fight, using her knowledge of mechanics to dislodge stones and create distractions. But she was utterly outmatched by the magical storm raging between the two men. In a final, reckless push, Kaelin gathered all his focus, channeling the spirit of the great dragon within him. A wave of pure, solar heat rushed forward, forcing Malachar to step back. But in that single moment of diverted attention, the leader of the Ashen Hand lunged. His fingers closed around the Heartstone, wrenching it from its resting place. A triumphant, cold smile touched his lips as he vanished into the shadows of the broken doorway, his form dissolving into the gloom. The tomb began to shudder violently, great cracks racing up the walls as if the mountain itself were feeling the loss. "We have to go now," Lyra shouted, pulling a stunned Kaelin toward the exit. He stood for a precious second, his chest heaving, the volatile energy within him slowly settling into a heavy dread. He had held his own against a master, but he had lost. The one artifact that could complete the restoration of the Dragonlords, the very key to the legacy he had just sworn to uphold, was now in the hands of a man who would use it to shape the world to his will. As they fled the collapsing chamber, the decision was already made. "We are going after him," Kaelin stated, his voice firm with a new resolve that overshadowed his exhaustion. "We have to get the Heartstone back." The consequences of failure were no longer abstract. With the Heartstone, Malachar would not just command an army. He could command minds, extinguishing free will itself. Their flight from the crumbling peak was a blur of falling rock and adrenaline. As they finally reached the relative safety of the lower slopes, the reality of their situation crashed down upon them. They were two against a shadow empire. "He is not just one man," Lyra said, her pragmatic tone returning. "He has resources, followers, a network. We cannot face that alone." Kaelin looked out over the vast, unknown lands stretching before them. The beacon of his awakening had been sent. Somewhere out there, others must have felt it. Their only hope now was to find them, to find the scattered few who still remembered the old songs and were willing to fight for a future not built on control. The valley was a secret carved into the very bones of the mountains, accessible only by a path that seemed to dissolve behind them. The air here was different, thick with the scent of warm stone and a quiet hum of latent energy. But the people they found were not proud warriors. They were shadows, their faces etched with a deep, weary fear. They lived in camouflaged dwellings, their voices hushed, their movements careful. This was not a sanctuary, it was a hiding place. The elder, a man named Oren, with eyes that held the memory of a difficult past, met them with a wall of cold distrust. He had seen the beacon of Kaelin's awakening and knew it for what it was, a signal fire that could lead their enemies right to their doorstep. When Kaelin spoke of his purpose, of facing Malachar, the fear in the community became a tangible, suffocating presence. They had already endured so much. They would not risk the little they had left for a stranger's war. Desperation clawed at Kaelin. Words were not enough. He closed his eyes, reaching for the bond, for the spirit of Emberclaw that now resided within him. He did not call upon the wild, destructive power he had used before. Instead, he focused on the pure essence of the connection, the first spark of the Pact. A gentle, radiant flame, warm and golden, bloomed above his open palm. It did not burn or threaten. It pulsed with a soft, ancient light, a living piece of history they all recognized in their blood. The silence in the clearing was absolute. Oren's stern expression fractured, replaced by a look of profound, aching reverence. The flame was a truth that could not be argued with. He lowered his head in a slow nod. "You may stay," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But you bring a storm with you, heir." We all felt it. That single display of pure dragon fire earned them a tentative sanctuary, but the conflict was far from over. The refugees, while awed, were still terrified. They whispered of families separated, of homes left behind, of a life spent looking over their shoulders. Joining Kaelin meant stepping out of the shadows and into a fight they were not sure they could win. Kaelin looked at their frightened faces, at the children who knew only this hidden life, and made a decision that felt as natural as breathing. "I did not come here to ask you to fight my war," he told them, his voice carrying through the quiet clearing. "I came to find my people. Your safety is my responsibility now. I will stand between you and any who seek to bring harm." This vow, spoken not as a command, but as a promise, began to wear down their resistance. A few of the younger members, their eyes alight with a long-suppressed fire, stepped forward. They were tired of hiding. They wanted to remember what their legacy truly meant. Under Oren's watchful eye, they began to train with Kaelin, not in combat, but in control. They practiced sensing the flow of energy in the earth, communicating simple concepts through shared warmth, learning to listen to the ancient song that ran in their veins. It was during these first, fragile lessons that the stakes were raised to a terrifying new height. Oren shared the knowledge guarded by his people for generations. Malachar was not merely collecting artifacts. He was gathering his forces for a specific, catastrophic ritual. He planned to use the Heartstone at the site of the ancient Sunken city to perform a working of old magic that would not command, but dominate. He would forge a psychic chain, binding the will of every dragon-touched being to his own, creating an unstoppable army of thralls. The very thought sent a cold dread through the valley. Their training, once a hopeful exercise, became a desperate race against a ticking clock. Then the scouts returned. Their faces were pale, their reports hurried. Malachar's army was on the move. A vast column of gray-clad soldiers and strange, hulking siege engines was marching with purpose, and their destination was clear. They were heading for the salt flats that surrounded the legendary Sunken city. The time for hiding was over. The time for a stand had begun. The first training session was chaos. Kalen stood before the small group of dragon-blooded, their faces a mix of hope and deep uncertainty. He asked them to simply feel for the warmth within, the shared ember of their lineage. Instead, the air filled with uncontrolled flickers and sudden, angry sparks. One young man's attempt to form a simple flame resulted in a scorched patch of grass and a wave of embarrassed frustration. They were all individual sparks, burning alone and at odds with each other. Kalen realized then that his greatest challenge was not teaching them to be powerful, but teaching them to listen. He had them sit in a circle, hands nearly touching, and asked them not to push their power outward, but to feel for the rhythm of the person next to them. It was like trying to harmonize a dozen different songs, but slowly, over days of patient effort, the flickers began to pulse in time. A shared, shimmering dome of heat wavered into existence above them, a fragile shield woven from their united will. It was the first new Dragonlord Coterie in centuries, not born in a moment of glory, but forged in quiet, determined practice. This hard-won unity had an unexpected effect. The refugees, who had lived in fear for so long, began to stand a little taller. They saw their own potential reflected in the coordinated exercises. Kalen's leadership was not one of command, but of shared discovery, and it ignited a long-dormant pride within the community. They were no longer just hiding. They were remembering what they were. Lyra watched from the edge of the training ground, her arms crossed. She was a master of leverage and logistics, but this was a language she could not speak. Every synchronized pulse of fire, every shared glance of understanding among the dragon-blooded, pushed her further to the sidelines. The partnership that had saved them in the mountains now felt unbalanced, the pragmatic bond of survival strained by a magic she could never possess. She busied herself with inventory and scouting reports, her contributions feeling mundane next to the spectacle of awakening power. Kalen noticed her withdrawal. He found her one evening, meticulously sharpening a set of metal hooks, her focus a little too intense. "We are strong," he told her, "but strength without a plan is just a hammer." "We have the flame, Lyra, but you have the map. You see the terrain we miss. I need you to be our strategist." He was not offering her a consolation role. He was officially integrating her unique skills into the very heart of their resistance. Her knowledge of supply lines, enemy troop movements, and tactical ambushes became as vital as any shield of fire. The group's first major exercise was her design, a simulated defense of the valley, using coordinated flame bursts to disrupt imaginary advancing lines. The plan was sound, but their newfound power was still a wild thing. As the Coterie channeled their energy to create a massive, swirling wall of fire to block a theoretical cavalry charge, their combined focus wavered for a single, critical second. The controlled wall ruptured. A colossal pillar of raw flame, bright as a second sun, shot into the twilight sky. It hung there for a long, terrifying moment, a brilliant beacon announcing their presence to anyone watching. The valley fell into a stunned, dreadful silence. Their greatest achievement had become their greatest vulnerability. The time for preparation was over. The signal fire, though an accident, was also a declaration. They could no longer wait in the safety of the mountains. With their capabilities growing and their location potentially compromised, they had to move. They would depart for the Sunken City at first light, a small band of hopeful rebels marching toward the gathering storm, knowing that a final confrontation with Malachar and the full might of the Ashen Hand was now inevitable. The journey to the Sunken City was a passage through a drowned world. Their small boats glided through a labyrinth of half-submerged marble pillars and vine-choked archways, the murky water hiding both their approach and whatever else might be waiting below. The air was heavy and still, thick with the scent of salt and thyme. Every shadow seemed to hold the glint of a gray cloak, every ripple in the water a potential signal to the Ashen Hand patrols that moved on their own dark barges. They traveled with a desperate silence, their only guide the growing pull of a terrible, gathering energy that drew them toward the city's heart. When they finally beached their craft on a sliver of dry land, the sight that greeted them was both magnificent and unsettling. The central temple, a colossal structure of white stone, rose from the water, its grand plaza now a stage for Malachar's ambition. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the soles of their boots, a sound that seemed to leach the warmth from the very air. The ritual had already begun. The ancient city itself resisted this intrusion. Walkways crumbled without warning into the dark canals below. Strange, crystalline growths on the temple walls pulsed with defensive energy, releasing blasts of disorienting light if anyone drew too near. They were not just racing an enemy, they were navigating a place that refused to be disturbed. Time was a luxury they did not possess. Kalen could feel the pressure building, a psychic weight that promised the absolute end of free will for his kind. He turned to Lyra, his decision made in an instant. We cannot fight this head-on while he is protected by an entire army. Take a small team, find their supply barges, and cripple them. Create chaos, draw their forces away from the temple. I will find Malachar. Lyra's eyes met his, the old pragmatism warring with the clear danger of the plan. She gave a single, sharp nod, already selecting her team and melting back into the watery ruins. Her task was a distraction, but a vital one, a strike at the logistics that enabled the ritual's completion. As Kalen and his cotter of dragon, blooded, took their positions within the temple's vast, echoing outer chambers, the air itself began to crackle. It was a dry, static charge that raised the hairs on their arms and tasted of ozone and iron. Then a voice rolled through the ruins, smooth, cold, and amplified by the dark energy coiling around the central spire. It was Malachar. I felt your clumsy beacon in the mountains, he spoke, the words slipping into their minds as much as their ears. You have saved me the trouble of seeking out the last embers. Come, children of fire, witness the forging of a new age. The pull of the Heartstones was a physical force, a deep and rhythmic thrum that seemed to vibrate in Kalen's very bones. He found Malachar standing at the center of the temple's grand plaza, one hand raised toward the sky, the other gripping the pulsating artifact. The Heartstone was no longer a captive light. It had become a dark sun, its core swirling with the gathered energy of many ancient spirits, now bound to another's will. Malachar did not even turn as Kalen entered. He simply spoke, his voice amplified by the stone's immense power. You are too late, heir. The Pact is being rewritten. With a sweeping gesture, he unleashed the Heartstone's fury. From its swirling core, forms of shimmering, malevolent energy coalesced into the air. They were spectral dragons, their roars silent but their presence radiating unease, their forms woven from the very essence Malachar was commanding. They dove toward Kalen with terrifying speed. Kalen's Coterie did not hesitate. They moved as one, their training in the valley overriding their fear. A brilliant golden dome of interwoven fire snapped into existence around them just as the first specter struck. The impact was deafening, a clash of opposing forces that shook the temple foundations. The shield held, but the strain was immense. Kalen could feel the collective will of his people, a tapestry of determination stretched to its limit as the spectral forms hammered against their defenses. Yet even as he poured his own energy into the shield, a different voice whispered in his mind. It was the Heartstone. It showed him a vision, not of domination, but of peace. With its power, he could end all conflict, unite every fractured kingdom, and ensure no one like Malachar could ever rise again. All it would require was his will. He could take the stone and become the guide the world truly needed. The temptation was a sweet, cold thought, offering a solution to every hardship at the cost of his own freedom. He looked at the faces of his Coterie, strained and shining with sweat in the golden light of their shared shield. He saw the truth. That kind of control, no matter how noble the intent, was just another form of the prison Malachar was building. He turned his back on the stone's seductive promise. Instead of reaching for its power, he focused his senses inward, feeling for the flows of energy that fed the ritual. He found them, thick conduits of gathered force, snaking across the plaza floor from the Heartstone to the ritual markers. He redirected his own fire, not in a destructive blast, but in a precise, surgical strike, severing one of the primary channels. The effect was immediate. The spectral dragons flickered, their forms becoming less substantial. Malachar's control was not yet absolute, and the disruption created a flaw in his working. But the ritual was not broken. With every second that passed, the leader of the Ashen Hand wove the ancient spirits more tightly into his web, his connection becoming harder and harder to break. Then, from the far side of the sunken city, a series of thunderous booms echoed across the water. A pillar of black smoke, thick and oily, rose into the sky. A moment later, the shouts of confused soldiers and the frantic blare of alarm horns echoed through the ruins. Lyra's team had succeeded. The supply barges were burning. The distraction was perfectly timed. The spectral dragons, their summoning energy momentarily disrupted by Kalen's earlier strike, and now by Malachar's own diverted attention, wavered and dissolved into shimmering mist. The sudden silence was staggering. For one precious, open moment, Malachar's focus was split, his grand ritual vulnerable. The path to the Heartstone, and to the man who held it, was clear. The air itself seemed to tear. Kalen did not call upon the fire in his veins alone. He reached out, a silent plea across the bond he shared with his Coterie, and felt their answering trust, a surge of life and will that flowed into him. He did not take it, they gave it. For one terrifying moment, he became a conduit for their combined essence, a living focus for a purifying inferno that was more than flame. It was a river of light, a torrent of raw creation, aimed directly at the Heartstone. The impact was not an explosion of sound, but of silence. A sphere of absolute whiteness swallowed the world, and when vision returned, the artifact was gone, shattered into a million fading sparks. Malachar's connection to the ancient spirits was severed in an instant, the psychic chains dissolving into nothing, but the cost was immediate. The brilliant light faded, leaving behind a scene of profound exhaustion. Around Kalen, his friends collapsed, their energy utterly spent, their faces pale. The guilt was a colder fire than any he had ever summoned. He had used their very lives as a weapon. In that final, draining moment, he saw the backlash of the broken ritual, a wave of chaotic energy rushing back toward their weakened forms. With the last dregs of his own strength, he threw himself forward, raising a final, flickering shield. He took the full, concussive force of the collapsing magic upon his own back. It felt like the mountain itself had fallen on him. The temple plaza began to shudder, great fissures snaking across the stone as pillars groaned and tipped into the dark water. Through the haze of his pain, Kalen saw Malachar stagger to his feet. The man's face was a mask of pure, undiluted fury. His grand design was ash, but his personal power remained. "You have broken a toy," he snarled, his voice cutting through the chaos. "But you have not broken me. This world will still burn, Heir, and I will personally ensure you are the first kindling." With that, he melted into the deepening shadows of the crumbling temple, a phantom swallowed by the ruins he had helped to destroy. The war was not over. It had simply found a new, more dangerous shape. Silence settled over the ruins, thick and heavy as the dust. The victory felt hollow, measured in the shallow breaths of his friends, lying spent and pale on the cold stone. Kalen moved among them, his own body a tapestry of aches, his hands gentle as he helped bind their wounds. Around them, the freed dragon spirits drifted like wisps of warm light, no longer bound by the Heartstone's cold will. They did not flee into the ether. Instead, they gathered, their ethereal forms circling Kalen in a slow, silent dance of acknowledgement. They were not his to command, but they had chosen him as their guardian, a living anchor in a world that had forgotten their song. This quiet gathering in the sunken city became a beacon of a different kind. Across the land, in hidden mountain villages and secluded forest holds, others who carried the dormant spark felt the shift. The tyrannical pull of the ritual was gone, replaced by a clear, steady call of belonging. One by one, they packed their few belongings and turned their faces toward the whispered location of the hidden valley, their journeys begun by a hope they had not felt in a lifetime. The scattered embers were finally drawing together. As the initial urgency faded, Lyra found him alone at the water's edge, staring into the dark expanse. Her usual pragmatic calm was gone, replaced by a sharp, fearful anger. "You could have lost them," she said, her voice low and tight. "You channeled their very life force. What if it had been too much? What if one of them had not gotten back up?" Her confrontation was not about strategy, but about the terrifying burden he now carried. He had been willing to risk them all to win, and she had seen the horror on his face when he realized it. Her words struck the core of the unease growing inside him. He looked from her worried face to the resting forms of his cotter, and the truth was undeniable. "I was wrong," he admitted, the words feeling like a vow. "I was desperate, and I saw only one path. I will never use my friends as a weapon like that again. I have to find a better way to lead." This promise, spoken into the salt-tinged air, was the true foundation of his command, built not on power, but on protection. The immediate threat of the ritual was gone, but a more personal and unpredictable challenge remained. Malachar was still out there, his ambition curdled into a vendetta. And the world was now watching. The brilliant signal of their conflict had been seen by kings and commoners alike. The Dragonlords were no longer a myth or a hidden fear. They were a returned power, and every throne room and shadowy council would be deciding how to respond. With the freed spirits gliding overhead like a constellation of gentle stars, and their numbers slowly growing with new arrivals, they turned their backs on the sunken city. The journey home was not a retreat, but a procession. They were no longer a handful of rebels, but the heart of a rekindled legacy. And on the wind, a new sound could be heard, a soft, harmonious hum, the whispers of ancient dragons guiding their heirs home. The hidden valley was no longer a place of whispers. It was a symphony of new life. The return of Kalen and his Coterie, accompanied by the drifting, gentle forms of the freed dragon spirits, was met with a celebration that echoed off the stone walls. They were hailed as heroes, but Kalen felt the weight of that title settle on his shoulders. A hero's work ends with the battle, but a leader's work begins the next morning. The Refuge began to transform, almost of its own accord. Makeshift shelters were replaced by sturdy lodges, built around the valley's warm, geothermal vents. The central clearing, once a place for quiet gatherings, became an open-air forum, a new school where the oldest among them shared the fragments of remembered lore, and the youngest practiced, shaping the light in their hands. Kalen and Lyra found themselves at the center of it all, not by proclamation, but by the quiet consensus of a people looking for direction. He was the heart of their power, and she was the mind of their survival, a partnership that gave the growing community both hope and a practical plan. Yet, not every voice joined the chorus of renewal. Oren, the elder who had first granted them sanctuary, watched the construction with deep unease. He found Kalen one evening as the sounds of hammers and saws finally quieted. "We dug our home into the shadows for a reason," he said, his voice low. "You have lit a beacon on a hill. You think you have won a war, but you have only announced our location to every enemy we have ever had." This new visibility, he argued, was an invitation for a conflict they could not hope to survive. The concern in his words was a cool current running beneath the valley's newfound warmth, a sobering reminder that security was a fragile thing. Kalen listened, truly listened, to the old man's worries. He remembered the profound cost of his desperate gamble at the sunken city, the feeling of his friends' lives flowing through him. A single leader, no matter how well-intentioned, could make a catastrophic mistake. The next day, he gathered everyone. "Power cannot reside in one person," he announced. "It must live in our shared will." He established a council, with seats for elders like Oren, for the strongest of the Coterie, for Lyra as head of security and logistics, and for representatives chosen by the newest arrivals. It was a messy, often frustrating way to govern, but it ensured that every concern, every hope, and every warning had a place to be heard. The decision did not erase the anxiety, but it honored it, weaving the caution of the past into the bold tapestry of their future. This fragile peace was interrupted by the return of a scout, her face smudged with soot and her eyes wide with a fresh terror. She brought word from the desolate volcanic wastes to the north. Malachar was not licking his wounds. He was gathering. The scout spoke of twisted, molten creatures drawn from the fire pits, and of dark, cloaked figures who did not walk like living men. He is not building an army, she whispered. He is forging something worse. The news settled over the valley like a heavy mist. Yet on the very same day, a different kind of discovery was made. In the steamy waters of the valley's hottest spring, nestled among the glowing stones, were 3 perfect, crystalline eggs, their shells pulsing with a soft, internal light. The first new dragon eggs in centuries. The sight filled the community with a profound, trembling hope. Kaelin placed a hand on one, feeling the gentle, promising warmth within. This was the future they were fighting for, a legacy reborn. But as he looked from the eggs to the northern horizon, he knew this was only a quiet moment between storms. The Chronicles of Fire and Flight had a new chapter, and it was already being written in the fires of the north. Heat and sulfur choked the air as Kaelin stepped onto the cracked obsidian plain. Before him, Malachar stood wreathed in the unnatural smoke of his own making, his form a dark silhouette against the erupting geysers. Around him, the corrupted dragons moved with a jerky, strained obedience, their eyes glowing with a cold fire that was not their own. This was not a battlefield for conquest. It was a place of confinement, and Kaelin had come not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. Malachar's voice cut through the roar of the earth. You bring your little lights to my forge. I will extinguish them all. He unleashed his will, and the enslaved beasts surged forward, their movements a symphony of forced distress. Kaelin did not meet their charge with a wall of destructive flame. He stood firm, closing his eyes and reaching not for the power within himself, but for the bonds that connected him to every member of his coterie, standing behind him. He did not draw their energy, he asked for their trust. In that moment, their individual wills became a single, harmonious chord. A shield of pure, brilliant light erupted from them, not as a barrier to cause harm, but as a resonant wave of pure connection. It washed over the corrupted dragons, and where Malachar's control was a chain of cold force, this light was a key. It did not fight the darkness. It reminded the enslaved spirits of what they were, of the warmth of the bond they had lost. One by one, the cold fire in their eyes sputtered and faded, replaced by a dawning, ancient recognition. With a great, shuddering cry of release, the last of Malachar's psychic chains fell away. The dragons, now free, turned their gaze upon their former master, not with anger, but with a profound and terrifying judgment. Robbed of his army and facing the unified front of a power he could never comprehend, Malachar's defiance crumbled into frantic retreat. He stumbled backward, his grand ambitions turning to ash in his mouth, and vanished into a chasm of fire and shadow, consumed by the very wastes he had sought to command. The victory was not one of strength, but of spirit. The true power of the Dragonlords was never about commanding fire. It was about kindling the light in others, and together, becoming a beacon that no shadow could ever truly overcome. The wind that swept the volcanic summit was clean, scoured of the lingering taste of smoke and control. Kaelin stood surrounded not by subjects, but by friends, their faces lit by the gentle glow of the newly freed dragons circling overhead. It was a quiet so profound it felt like a new kind of sound. He looked at his hands, remembering the ink stains of a scribe, the tremor of a fugitive, the hum of raw power. Now they were steady. The journey had not been about finding strength, but about learning what to do with it. He was no longer just a boy who had taken a scroll. He was the heart of a community, a guardian of a legacy that had been sleeping for 1,000 years. The chronicles of fire and flight were no longer dusty tales. They were living history, and they were only on the first page. The world remained a vast and uncertain map. Malachar was gone, but not ended, a shadow that had slipped back into the cracks of the earth. What other ambitions lay hidden in forgotten corners, watching the rebirth of the Dragonlords with fear or with greed? The challenges ahead would not be solved by a single, brilliant flame, but by the patient, enduring warmth of a protected hearth. The true test of their return would not be in the conflicts they faced, but in the peace they built. This new age would not be defined by solitary rulers on thrones of Obsidian, but by a network of guardians, their bonds woven from trust and a shared purpose. They would be a beacon, not a warning, a sanctuary for the lost, and a light for those still finding their way. The great dragons, their spirits now woven into the very fabric of the land, seemed to hum with a quiet approval. The flight was far from over.
you.